Okay, chapter 6 is the integumentary system, and like any other system, systems are composed of organs. In this case, the organ is the skin, and all the organs are composed of tissues. So one tissue that you're going to find in there is, for example, subcutaneous tissue. Okay, so we're going to take a look at those things. So if we scroll down, we're going to see the figure that we have here for the skin. In this figure, you can see that the skin has 3 layers: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Okay, so this is the organ, the skin. We said all the organs are composed of tissues. So this epidermis, this part right here, is composed of epithelial tissue, stratified squamous. The dermis, this pink area, you see this pink area right here, this one right here, and this one right here, right? All this is connective tissue, because as you can see here, it connects these structures that you have in here. Okay, they are connected by the connective tissue that you have right here. And also in the hypodermis, you have adipose tissue. Okay, so then let's keep going and let's see what do you find in the epidermis. The epidermis, you have, as I said, stratified squamous. That means that there's a lot of cells in here. These cells are grouped in other layers. But since we have layers in the skin, in order not to be confused with these layers of the skin, these layers that you have in the epidermis, we're going to call them stratums. We're going to see that in a little bit. In the dermis, yes, we said that all this pink area is connective tissue, but this connective tissue is going to connect these structures. What are these structures? Well, we have hair, we have muscle, nerves, we have glands, we have blood vessels in here. This is an artery, this is a vein. Okay, we have receptors. For example, receptors for pain, for temperature, etc. And again, we said that down here, what we're going to have is adipose tissue. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Let's review before we move forward. We said the skin has 3 layers: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. We said epidermis has a tissue which is going to be stratified squamous. The dermis has a tissue which is going to be connective tissue. And the hypodermis have adipose tissue. You have multiple cells in here. We're going to see what cells we have later on. And in here we already mentioned the structure that we have in the dermis. So let's keep scrolling down. And right here we have functions of the skin. Well, functions of the skin depends on the functions of all these tissues that we have in there. Resistance to trauma and infection, for example, is given to you by the outer layer of your skin, such as your epidermis, because we have multiple layers of cells in there, and they help us, with infections as well as trauma, because keratin, which is a very important protein that we have on our skin, is going to protect us against, for example, trauma. Other areas, our skin is impermeable to water in some circumstances, most of the time, so that's why it prevents water from going in or going out in excess from our body, which may cause problems. Vitamin D synthesis, one of the steps necessary to produce vitamin D, happens in the skin. Sensation, again, we have receptors in the skin, and we said that, for example, we have receptors for temperature, for pain, right? Thermoregulation. Okay, it insulates our body so we don't lose our temperature. Right? Nonverbal communication, like for example, when we are sad, our faces change, or when we are happy, same thing. Right here, we have a sad face, so nonverbal communication. Okay, we keep scrolling down, and we see the epidermis. In the epidermis, let's take a look at this with a little bit more detail. We said we have multiple layers, and these layers are going to be called what? Stratums. So what stratums we have? Corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basal. Since we have multiple layers, we have multiple different kinds of cells. For example, we said this is a stratified squamous. That means that these cells, most of them are going to be squamous. That means flat. These cells die, and at the very end, what we're going to have in here is keratin. Eventually, these cells we're going to shed these cells, right? So then we're constantly shedding cells in our epidermis. Eventually, we will run out of these cells unless that we have a cell that is going to be the one that is going to be replacing these cells. This cell that replaces these cells that we're constantly losing is going to be the stem cell. The stem cell produces multiple different layers, multiple different cells, and these cells keep going up and up and up and replacing the ones that we're constantly losing. So the keratinocytes, which are the ones that we are constantly losing because they die, right? They are produced actually at the very bottom layers of the epidermis. Eventually they trouble up, they die, they fill with keratin, and eventually we shed them, right? So the job of the stem cell is to replace these keratinocytes that we are constantly losing. In addition to that, you know that our skin has some color, and this color is going to be provided by the melanocytes. The melanocytes produce a substance called melanin. All of us, all humans, have melanocytes, and we all produce melanin in more or less quantities, but we all do. If we don't produce melanin, then we are not considered what we all call normal, but rather now we have a medical condition called albinism. Other type of cells that we have in there are going to be dendritic cells. The dendritic cells are going to be part of our immune system that is going to help defend our body in case that some bacteria get inside. These are the very first cells that are going to start fighting. We have other cells in here, tactile cells, that are going to be part of receptors that are going to help us touch things and identify things that we are touching, for example, with our fingers. Okay, so these are the cells that we have right here. We have these extensions from the epidermis going into the dermis. These ones are called epidermal ridges. Now, the ones from that dermis going up into the epidermis, as you can see here, they are called dermal papillae. This one right here. Okay, so then let's keep scrolling down. And we have in here the cells. I already talked about the stem cells, the keratinocytes, melanocytes as well. I also talk about the tactile cells and dendritic cells as well, right? I said dendritic cells are the ones that defend our body. We also talk about the layers of the epidermis. We said they are called stratums. They're going to be basal, espinosum, granulosum, lucidum, and corneum. Okay, we said life of the keratinocyte. We said that the keratinocyte is going to be replaced by the stem cells, right? The stem cells are constantly producing, so it's produced at the very bottom layers of the epidermis, but eventually travels up, changing and filling up with keratin that eventually is going to protect our skin. Okay, so let's keep scrolling down. And we have in here the dermis. Okay, we said the dermis is another layer in our skin, and in the dermis is going to have connective tissue. What the connective tissue is going to connect in there, different structures as we showed before. You have blood vessels, nerves, muscles, glands, receptors that are going to be connected or put together or hold together by the connective tissue. Okay, so then the type of connective tissue that you have in there is going to be dense, irregular. That's the type of connective tissue we have in the dermis. So we keep scrolling down. We have in here again what we already mentioned, papillae and ridges. Okay, but let's keep scrolling down. The hypodermis. In the hypodermis, we said that we have fat, right? We already mentioned this before. The fat, we have two main kinds: white fat and brown fat. Brown fat is in newborns, so the ones that we have are basically white fat. The job of the fat is insulation, providing cushion, energy storage. Okay, and it's a very important secondary sexual characteristic as well. Right, the skin color we said is given to us by the melanin that we have in our melanocytes. And that's in normal circumstances, right? It may change a little bit when we have accidents, for example, and it becomes red sometimes, right? It becomes yellowish when people have jaundice, or blue when people don't have a lot of oxygen, but that's not normal, right? That's in abnormal circumstances. So you have in there pallor is way too white. The skin becomes very clear because, for example, it's very cold. So I'm not going to talk much about it because that's not normal. Again, albinism is the lack of melanin, and again, that's not normal. Jaundice is not normal again, so we are not going to talk about that. Skin markings are the marks that we have on the skin. Friction ridges, for example, are the ones that we have at the tip of our fingers. Flexion lines are also seen in the fingers, in these cross lines that we have in our skin. For example, you can clearly see that in our palms as well as in our fingers. And that's about it for this part. The next topic is hair and nails. There are structures that we have in our skin, but there's not much to say about it, and there's not much for you to know about it other than the structures that the hair is going to have. For example, the hair is going to have a hair root right here. Okay, a hair bulb, which is this one right here at the very bottom, and a hair shaft. Hair shaft is the one that we are constantly, cutting and trimming depending on the different, preferences that people have. Hair is always associated with a muscle, which is called the piloerector muscle, and also associated with gland, right? That's why this gland produces sebum, for example, and this produces oil that is going to keep our hair oily, because if our hair dries, then obviously it's going to break. So that's all you need to know about hair. The function of the hair, is not everybody is on the same page about it. Some people say that, for example, the main job of our hair is the one that we have on top of a scalp, which is to reduce the loss of heat. But not everybody agrees with that. Other than that, we have hair all over our body. But again, it's not, it doesn't have a particular function. That's why we cover our skin with clothes. Okay, so then hair and texture, some people have it straight, curly. And again, there's not much to say about hair. The same applies to the hair cycle. You don't need to know this. Okay, I don't think there's way too many other things that are more important for you to know rather than the hair cycle. You just need, I guess, just as an FYI, it goes through anagen, catagen, and telogen cycle. But again, it's just as an FYI. So if we keep scrolling down, we have in here functions of hair again. Not everybody agrees in the function other than keeps the body from losing temperature. Nails, same thing, not that many things to say about it other than the different parts. The very bottom is called the lunule, this one right here. The middle is the nail body, and also we have the free edge, which is a part that we're constantly cutting. Okay, so let's keep scrolling down, and that's it. Okay, the next topic is cutaneous glands. We already talked about glands already, right? This is just a different type of classification of glands. You can say this classification of this is based on the type of glands that you find in your skin. And you have, obviously, the very first one is sweat glands. Regardless of the type of gland that it is, they're always going to have a sinus and a duct. So in this case, the sweat glands produce sweat. Very important. Sweat helps us to cool our body down because sweat removes heat. Okay. So then the next one that we have in here is going to be, again, this is just a different type of classification. Now, this other gland is sebaceous glands. Why? Because they produce sebum, which is a type of oil, right? And again, it's very important to have oil, for example, associated to our hair. We already mentioned that. Otherwise, it will break. It will become brittle. Not only that, we have also we have sebum in our face, in our skin, right? In order to maintain our skin flexible. Unfortunately, sometimes, when we reach puberty, these glands become blocked, and because of that, we get, pimples and things like that. Other glands that we have are ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands are the glands that produce wax, and we have glands wax, for example, in our auditory canal, in our ears. It protects our ears against, the overgrowth of bacteria, for example. It kills bacteria, or the introduction of foreign objects or foreign for example, organisms such as flies and ants, maybe, right? And also it waterproofs the ear canal against water. And the last one is mammary glands that we have right here. These are also exocrine glands, right? Because we produce, human females produce milk, right? And therefore the milk comes out through the duct, and that happens when the females are breastfeeding a baby. Okay, the only time when mammary glands produce milk is when the females are pregnant. Other than that, mammary glands should never produce or release milk. Also to mention is the males also have breasts, mammary glands, but they don't develop as big as the ones in the case of females, right? So, but needless to say, males also have breasts. Okay, and we keep scrolling down. That's it. Okay, the next topic is skin disorders. This is not normal anatomy, so I'm not going to mention much about it. You can just pretty much skip it because it's not going to be part of your exam. Okay, that's it.